In this video of Tableau Explained, we're going to take a deep dive into calculation. We are not just going to look at how to perform this calculation, but we want to understand the fundamental concepts behind this calculation. These are the main concepts we are going to go through here in this video. We're going to start off by understanding basic calculation, followed by concepts of row-level calculation, what aggregation is, and take a look at table calculation, and finally, level of details. So now let's start with the basics. When we have a set of data, we want to be able to derive something or compute something. So let's think of this in the context of a single column data. And these are some of the calculations that we may try to perform. We have our very basic arithmetic calculation, where we perform things like plus, minus, divide, multiplication, and then we have things like string manipulation. We can do things like extracting certain text out of a particular string, or we might want to do things like concatenation of multiple strings. Or we might want to perform logical statements like if-else condition. So all this falls under how we might want to perform a calculation. And when we perform all of this on one single column, there is not much concept to understand. It's pretty straightforward. And now when we involve more than one column, we might want to start to think about the fundamental concepts behind this calculation. So what does it mean when we are looking at computation between more than one columns? In this case here, we have an example where we look at deriving a profit from a revenue column and a cost column. So we will take revenue column minus the cost column. This is something straightforward to understand, but the concept here we want to keep in mind is the idea that this is actually a row-level calculation. And this is an important concept to understand when we move on to the next concept of aggregation. In aggregation, what we are doing is that we are performing the calculation on the entire data set. Performing the sum, maybe the sum of the sales, we want to find the average of sales. So when we perform such calculation, these calculations are performed in the entire data set. Now let's take a pause with all this theory and we're going to take a look at how they look like in Tableau. So now let's take a look at this simple set of data. We have the product, the cost, and the revenue. When we bring all this data into the view here, we will see that we're actually performing a sum on the cost, the sum on the revenue. So this is performing an aggregation. And by default, when you bring any type of values into the table over here, Tableau will on default perform a form of aggregation. And in this set of data, we can see actually there is no form of aggregation actually being performed because that is actually the most granular level. Now let's try to perform some of the basic calculation that we have went through. From this product, I want to be able to split into the brand name and also the product name. So what I'm going to do is create a calculated field and call this brand. And the function I'm going to use is split here. And we know that this is separated by a underscore, okay? And the string should be product. And we are going to take the first set of data that comes from this split. Now let's do the same for the product itself. In this case, I'm going to do product name. And I'm going to change this to 2 to take the second part of the split. So now with this string manipulation, what we have done is that we have split this string over here into the brand and also the product name. So now let's remove some of this granular level to actually see some sort of aggregation going on. We know that there is two brands over here. One is brand 1 and one is brand 2. So let's say I want to find the total cost of brand 1. So what we're going to do is let's take just the brand here. And we'll see that this cost now is aggregated to brand 1. In this example, we see how the aggregation is performed. So we can change this aggregation by right-clicking on this, going to measure, and selecting different types of aggregation. We can perform an average cost, and we get our average cost for this particular brand. Now we're going to take a look at a specific example to illustrate a problem if we don't understand the concepts of row-level calculation in aggregation. With this set of data, we want to find out the percentage of profit. So first, let's find out what is the profit. The profit can be derived from the revenue minus the cost. Now this is straightforward. There is no problem in this calculation. But now let's calculate the percentage. So how do we calculate percentage? Will be the profit over cost. What we're going to do is profit percent. And I'm going to label this row level so that we can see the difference here. So if we just perform based on this table directly, we're going to just take profit divided by cost. And this should give us our profit percentage. So let's bring this over here and let's format this. And here our calculation seems to work fine. We get our percentage of profit over here. The problem here is what we are doing here is a row level calculation. And we are going to hit into problems when we do things like a total aggregation over here. So let's take a look at what happens. Now let's add a total. With this grand total added to this table, what it's doing is that it's taking the sum of all these different rows and aggregating it here.
But over here, can you see what is wrong with this 260%? This illustrates the breakdown of the calculation that goes behind the table. So we have the row level calculation, where we have our profit here calculated on the row, which is 50 minus 20, we get 30, and the percentage of profit will be the profit over the cost for this particular row. And we have seen in our Tableau example, we have this problem here of 260%. So how did this come about? This is from 150 plus 67 plus 43. And here is where the problem is. For this profit percentage, the correct calculation should have been for this row, 55 divided by 70, and we should have 78%. So what we have to do here is to perform an aggregation. We need to take an aggregation of the profit, which is the sum of profit, divided by the sum of costs.
So how can we do this in Tableau? How can we get 78% here? We need to modify our calculation. So now what we need to do here is that we don't want to be performing row level calculation. We want to be performing aggregation. We need to add the function sum. So this will tell Tableau that this is an aggregation. We'll first take the sum of the profit first, then we divide by the sum of the cost. Now with this new calculation, we have our profit percentage now aggregated correctly. We get the 78.6% that we're expected to see over here. Now let's move on to the next concept, which is table calculation. So what is table calculation? How is this different from the calculations that we have went through? Table calculation, as it suggests, is limited in the scope of the table, which is whatever that appears on this sheet over here. And to understand table calculation, there's three concepts we need to keep in mind: the calculation type, the direction of the calculation, and the level we are computing this calculation on. So let's take a look at this table, which I have already set up. We can see the product category over here, and we can see the order date period over here. How we can perform table calculation is pretty easy. We just need to right-click on this aggregated measure value over here, and we go to Quick Table Calculation, and we have our different options of table calculation over here. And when we do that, we can see that there is a triangle over here that indicates that a table calculation is being performed. So now let's go back to our initial setup, where I can explain how this table calculation here, indicated by a triangle icon, and our default aggregated value over here. When we right-click on this, we can click on Edit Table Calculation, and this will give us the different options that we can perform table calculation on. We can choose the type of aggregation that we want to perform this on. So in this case, we have things like sum. We can also look at the average. So it will perform, say, the average of 219 and 370. So let's take our calculator to validate this. The next average here should be a combination of this divided by 2. So we have 219 plus 370, and then we want to divide by 2. So this gives us 295 over here. And the third item over here should be the sum of this divided by 3. So we have 219 plus 370 plus 422 divided by 3. And we have 337. So this is how the running average works. The next key concept that we need to understand is the direction of this calculation. So over here, we have seen what is table down. So means that the calculation is performing down this table. Now let's see what happens when we change to table across. So you will see that the calculation is performed across the table instead. And 219 plus 616 should give us 835. So now let's take our calculator to validate this. 219 plus 616, we have 835. And plus 276, we have 111. So what this is doing is that it's computing the running sum across the table. Now, what if we have across and down? What does it mean? It's to perform across and down. Now, let's take a look. When we perform across and down, we'll see that first level is across. We have validated this. We will get up to 1111. Now it performs down. We'll see that now this number here changed to 1481. How is that work? Is that it's taking 1111 plus 370. So we have 1111 plus 370. We have 1481. So now the next thing is it's still performing across down. So we will take this plus 821, which gives us 2302. So you will see that it will perform across and down. So now we understand what direction means. The next concept we need to understand is the level at which we are performing this calculation. So far, what we have seen is table level calculation. The calculation is performed across or down this entire set of table. Now, let's see what happens if we select pane. So what does pane means? Pane basically refers to the level at which the data is aggregated at in the table. So over here in this table, by default, we can see that there is this gray line that limits the scope of the table. So this is considered as one pane. So when we perform a pane across, what it's doing is that this calculation is limited to what is in this pane over here. This running sum here, we now no longer see the total of 219 plus 616, but we only see 616 is because the calculation is limited to this pane over here. Now, to illustrate a better use case of why we want to use pane calculation could be doing a pane down instead. And when we do that, we can see that the running sum calculation is only calculated at the year of this order date. It's limited to this year. So let's say we have a use case where we want to reset our calculation at every year. So this is one thing we can do. We can see that the running sum stops at this particular pane. So 219 plus 370 gives us 589 and so on up to 1626. And over here in the next pane, you will see that this sum get reset. We are 328 in Q1 of 2021, so we will see 328 over here. And then it performs the running sum within this pane. We have 328 plus 411, which then gives us 739. And then it goes on to stop at Q4 and then it resets for 2022 and so on. We also have other options to look at different levels. We can look at specific dimension, which are the dimensions we have listed in the table. We can select the dimensions we want to look at and we can play around with these other options over here. Now, the final concept in calculation that I want to go through is level of details. So this level of detail is also an important concept for order of operation. Order of operation is also a concept that has been covered in my other videos, which you can check out in the link in the description below. So what helped me to understand the level of details is to understand there is different hierarchy in the level of data. As level of details suggests, the data has different granularity, and this refers to detail. Whether is it at a higher level of detail or is it at the lower level of detail. And when we perform calculation relating to level of details, we'll use things like fix, exclude, and include. And to understand this, when we want to use fix or exclude, we will think of the higher level of detail. When we look at things like include, we will look at the lower level of detail. Now let's take a look at this table over here. What I have done is that we have a table with a product group, we have the product and also the customer. So this shows us the amount spent by the customer on a specific product. So the first aggregation that we see over here is our basic aggregation, which is the sum of the sales. And what I've done is that I have created three other calculations here, which is the fix, exclude and include calculation on this sum of sales. So let's take a look at how this calculation might look like. So for a fixed calculation, so what I am doing here is that I'm fixing the level, which is product, and then I will perform the aggregation, which is sum. So this is a syntax used when we are performing level of detail calculation. So this can be changed to exclude, and we will get our exclude calculation here, or we can change this to include. Now let's take a look at the number here to actually understand what does this level of detail calculation actually do. It's actually not too difficult to understand. You will realize that it actually literally means what it means. So let's start off with fix. What it's doing is that I am fixing the sum of this sales calculation at the product level. We can see that for these rows of data here, this calculation is fixed at the sum of the orange juice. So that's why we will see 33 across all rows, because I'm calculating at the fixed level of the product. So here we can see that when we perform just the sum on the product level, we'll see that orange juice is 33. And now let's match it back to our table. We'll see orange juice is 33. We'll see that soda is all on 12. So this is what we meant by fixing the aggregation at the product level. And exclude, what does exclude means? So in this table, we are basically excluding this level from our data. Again, back to the recap over here, right? When we use fix and exclude, we are performing this on a higher level of detail. What does this mean? In this table here, the lowest level of detail is actually the customer. So when we perform fix or exclude, we need to perform it at a higher level. So it cannot be on the lowest level. And when we perform exclude, we will see that we get entirely set of different numbers over here. Let's try to understand what does this mean. You will see all customer has the same 28.4, or Karen is 28.4, or John is 15.4. So what it is saying is that we are excluding this level here, and we are calculating the customer sum in the product group. So that is what it means by exclude. So here is a table where we perform a calculation excluding the product, where we only have the product group and the customer. And let's bring this back to our table here to validate the numbers. We can see that for Karen, in the product group beverage, we have 28.4. John, in the product group of beverage, we have 15.4. And lastly, we want to go through include. And for include, we will use it on the lower level of detail. In this table over here, we will not see a difference from our basic aggregated sum over here, because customer is the most granular level. We are not expecting any difference over here. Now let's take an example of when include will make a difference. Over here, I have a average sales by product. So this will give me the average sales of banana and so on. Now, what if I want to find out a scenario of what is the average sales per product per customer? To do that, what we need to do is bring in the lower level of detail, which is customer, into this calculation. So over here, I've created this calculation to include customer when we calculate the sum of sales. And then let me change this to average. And over here, we'll see a different average being calculated. So let's validate this data. So over here, we have the product and we have the customer and the amount spent on this product per customer. So John spent $15 on banana, Rob spent $6 on banana. In total, banana has a total sales of $21. And to calculate the average spending per customer on the banana, we are going to take 21 divided by 2 customers, which will give us 10.5. And this matches our calculation over here. If you like this video, do remember to like, share, and subscribe to support this channel. And do leave down in the comments if you have anything else you would like to see.